The minimalists have been obviously trying to minimize Jerusalem in the times of, primarily times of King David, King Solomon. There are extreme minimalists that simply reject the Bible out of hand and say that it's all a myth. My name is Avrohom Stolik. I live in Coral Gables, Florida. A number of years ago, I became involved in biblical archaeology. I've always been a Jewish history buff, but I found that archaeology makes history tangible. So I became very passionate, and the second hat that I wear, besides for my rabbi hat, is my Indiana Jones hat. And that's because I'm extremely immersed in this subject. So over the years, beginning in the 19th century, archaeologists discovered a certain part of Jerusalem which is called the City of David. And it is located outside of the present old city walls of Jerusalem, of the old city. And it was there that they discovered features and artifacts that directly relate to ancient Israel, and some of it's mentioned in the Bible. And today, there is so much in the way of archaeological discoveries in Jerusalem that show a clear Jewish historic presence in Jerusalem, whether it's the City of David, which is the ancient historic core of Jerusalem, or whether it's the old city, particularly the Jewish quarter, which has been excavated after 1967, after the reunification of Jerusalem. Much has been discovered that clearly shows a Jewish presence, whether it was mikvahs. There were about 200 ritual baths, mikvahs, that were discovered that were only used by Jews. There is a lot that has been uncovered that is directly relating to the Bible. The Bible tells us that King David was the one that captured Jerusalem from the Jebusites. So the oldest Jewish connection to Jerusalem that we can, as far back as we can go, is the period of King David and King Solomon. It's known as the United Monarchy period. The oldest connection that was found relating to Jerusalem and the Jewish presence there would be from the times of King David. In 2005, a very prominent archaeologist by the name of Eilat Mazar uncovered what she believes is King David's palace. And it is a massive structure. It's dubbed the large stone structure, but it is most likely King David's palace. And although there have been other archaeologists that have contested that, she dated it to King David's time period. And there's a consensus from a lot of other archaeologists that this, in fact, dates back to King David's time period. So some examples of where the archaeological evidence matches up with the biblical history. What comes to mind are two examples, one being the famous Hezekiah's tunnel. King Hezekiah, in Hebrew, Chizkiah, was one of the well-known kings of Jerusalem, and it was during the time period when he was anticipating the invasion of the Assyrian army that was led by King Sennacherib. So he actively prepared for that impending invasion in a number of ways. And the Bible clearly states that he had undertaken this massive project where he engineered, he had his people dig a water tunnel that was about 1,750 feet long that would channel the waters of the Gihon spring, which was the only natural water source in Jerusalem, to a pool, which was called the Shiloach pool, or the Siloam pool, inside the confines of the city, within the city walls. And being that the spring was located outside the city walls, it was vulnerable to the enemies. And what he did was he built this long tunnel, this engineered tunnel, which, if you visit the city of David today, would be a highlight of your visit, where you would walk approximately 45 minutes through this water tunnel, and it's definitely an exhilarating experience. Together with that, there were some wall fortifications that he had built that have been found in the Jewish quarter of the Old City that clearly indicates his active preparation for the impending invasion of the Assyrians, and that's a very clear, tangible parallel that we find in the archaeological record. Another example I would give is towards the end of the First Temple period, the last reigning king of Judea was a man by the name of Zedekiah, in Hebrew Tzidkiah. And it was during his reign that the Babylonians destroyed the temple, the first temple. And it was at that time when the situation looked doom and gloom, where he sent his ministers to the prophet Jeremiah, famous prophet, to ask him to pray for the welfare of Jerusalem. But the prophet said the time to pray for Jerusalem has passed, and he refused, and he said, surrender to the Babylonians and save your lives. These two of these ministers, 2 out of the 4, their names are unique names. One is called Yehuchal, the son of Shelemiah. The other is called Gedaliah, the son of Pashhur. Their clay seal impressions, which is essentially their personal seals that were used to seal the ancient documents, most likely originating from the Royal Archive, their personal seals have been found in the archaeological excavations in Jerusalem, very close to each other, including the seal of Hezekiah we mentioned before. His seal, personal seal, was found as well. The fact that 2 biblical characters mentioned in the Bible that wanted to put Jeremiah to death, they threw him into a pit. The fact that their names turned up 2,600 years after the fact, very in close proximity to each other, is just a very clear evidence to a biblical narrative. So the minimalists have been obviously trying to minimize the Jerusalem in the primarily times of King David, King Solomon. There are extreme minimalists that simply reject the Bible out of hand and say that it's all a myth. And of course, those minimalists have been proven wrong with a discovery in the northern part of Israel with the name of King David. According to these minimalists, King David was a mythical figure. But when 1993, when the Tel Dan Stela was found, that was erected by an enemy of the Israelites, an enemy of the Jews, from an Aramean king, who brags that he defeated a Jewish king who was a descendant from the house of David. This is about 130 years after the fact. Tells us that King David, there's extra biblical evidence for King David's existence. But as far as those that minimize the extent of King David's kingdom and his empire and King Solomon, as the Bible describes, mentioned before the discovery of King David's palace. King David's palace was a massive construction of complicated engineering. And if Jerusalem was nothing but a small hill country, small cow town, and David was a hill country chieftain, a Bedouin chief, if you will, a Bedouin chief could not begin to envision a massive, complex structure, the likes of which has been uncovered in the city of David by Elat Mazar. In addition to that, in the times of King David, there was a city that was discovered, that was been excavated, overlooking the Elah Valley. That's where the famous battle between David and Goliath took place. And it's called Kirbat Chiafa. And that fortified city had been found with very fortified. They found ancient Hebrew writing, what was believed to be one of the most ancient Hebrew writing ever found up until recently. And if such a fortified city existed at the edge of the Philistine country, it shows that King David and King Solomon's time period was not the small little cow town, but rather there were large fortified cities surrounding the entire Judean area. So the first temple, obviously both temples were situated on the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is controlled by an entity called the Waqf, which is under Jordanian custodianship. They do not allow any excavations on the Temple Mount. However, over time, certain discoveries were made that originated from the Temple Mount that clearly linked to temple activity. To give you two examples, number one, there have been a number of half-shekel coins that were found, half-shekel weights that date back from the First Temple period that was used to weigh the silver that would have to be given as a flat tax that was imposed on every Jew for the upkeep of a temple. Am I concerned that something will be found in the archaeological record that contests belief in the Bible or God? I'm not concerned. First of all, it's important to mention that Judaism is a faith-based religion. It's not a religion based on evidence. I mean, even belief in God, it's not like we can see God. We believe in the veracity of the Torah, the Bible, and it's an object of faith. We believe everything that says in the Torah, regardless if there is evidence to support it or not. Now, when you do have evidence, archaeological evidence, it strengthens your faith, but it's not that we rely on the archaeological evidence to prove, if you will, that the Bible is and the God is true. However, if I just may point out that when the archaeologists began to dig in Jerusalem in the 19th century, it's been over 150 years, and more discoveries have been found, and it's all pointing in the same direction, where it clearly shows stories of the Bible coming to life. It's showing the Jewish historic connection to Jerusalem, and it's the more that's found, the more evidence exists. So and over the past 150 years, it's been moving in pretty much in one way, where evidence is coming out. As it says in the book of Psalms and Tehillim, Even mi'eretz titzmach, the stones will call out from the ground. And they're saying, look, we're evidence that this existed. But as I mentioned before, even if we were not to have any evidence, I mean, you're talking for centuries, there was no archaeological evidence to support the biblical history, but the Jews still believed. But nevertheless, it's nice, and it's an added bonus when you have archaeological evidence to support the biblical history, because it strengthens our faith. Archaeology in Israel is like a national pastime. The moment the Israelis living in Israel had the opportunity to dig, they dug. I think it's because Jews have been away from they've been exiled from Israel by the Romans 2,000 years ago. I mean, there were Jews always living in Israel throughout all the centuries, but they've been subjugated to other nations. And the moment Jews had control and had freedom, they wanted to find the connection to their ancestors. And the best way to find that connection, other than studying the Bible, studying the Torah, studying our history, is to actually find tangible evidence of our ancestors' existence in Israel. And that's why even very secular Israelis have just become obsessed with archaeology. And I know that archaeology has become sort of like a political weapon in Israel. It's, you can't sneeze in Israel without, someone saying that there's something political about this. But nevertheless, there's like an innate curiosity and interest among all Israelis to find their past underground. And not just in Jerusalem, it's all over Israel, except just that Jerusalem is one of the most heavily excavated city in the world. But I think that that's probably what's behind this. And of course, there are those that study the Bible and they are just fascinated by these stories, and they would like to find any connection to the Bible that they can unearth from the ground. And that's back in the 19th century, Queen Victoria from Britain started this Palestine Exploration Fund, where she sent these explorers to Israel and Jerusalem in particular to find connections to the Bible. So this is going back a long time.